What's up, y'all? This is Zach. And look, I'm really excited about this. And I want to also shout out the team for being able to do this. You're listening to this because we're doing something called 12 Days of Podcasts. So look, this is content that we want to make sure y'all get before 2020 is over. All right. So we're hitting y'all with some content as we wrap up the year for the next 12 straight days. These are interviews that we had earlier this year, but we couldn't get to releasing them because of coordination and just current events. And we wanted to be a little bit more responsive to all the chaos that was happening around us in real time. So what we're doing is we're dropping this content for y'all now because we don't want y'all to hear it like 20 weeks from now. We want y'all to hear it now. So what you're about to hear is a super dope conversation that we have with an incredible guest. But before we get there, we're going to tap in with Tristan.
What's going on, y'all? It's Tristan from Layfield Resume Consulting, and I've teamed up with Living Corporate to bring you all a weekly career tip. Today, we're going to discuss how to properly ask questions. Have you ever asked a question and gotten a response that doesn't make sense? The issue may not lie with the other person, but in the way you ask your question. Questions are the cornerstone of communication, and yet many of us don't frame or ask our questions appropriately. Questions allow you to learn, get answers, give answers, mentor people, and ultimately develop a reputation, but that's all only if you utilize them correctly. So here's a few tips on how to ask great questions. Number one, try to stick to one sentence. You may have to get some background, which is okay, but try to limit the actual question to a single sentence. This helps in keeping your questions open-ended. Number two, don't offer answers unless those are truly the only options. In doing so, you limit the other person, which you never want to do because I can guarantee you've only thought about a few of the possible options. Number three, try not to sway the other person. While you may know the answer, your question should be answer neutral, allowing the person to answer them naturally. Number four, keep your talking to a minimum. The entire essence of a great question is to find out what the other person knows. If you ask the question in the right manner, you'll probably learn something. Number five, rinse and repeat for follow-up questions. Keep them neutral, open-ended, and as brief as possible. Asking better questions almost always results in better outcomes. Incorporate these tips when asking questions and start getting the answers that you're seeking. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
Dr. Roberts, how are you doing?
I'm doing well today. How are you, Zach?
You know, it's like a really loaded question. You know, I asked you all casual, but it's like, it's been a crazy year. You know, I think about, so what we're recording this after the election results. I have my daughter on my lap, so she'll probably be participating as we continue forward. But it's been wild. I'm thankful to be here though. How's your family doing? Everybody safe?
My family is safe. So yes, when you say, how are you doing? It's always a relative, right? I've got to go through the relativity. I have to go through considering the millions and millions of people who are suffering, directly the health costs of COVID right now. I'm well. I'm healthy. My family's healthy. My immediate family's healthy. I'm grateful for that. Considering the economic strife facing so many people right now, I have a job that allows me to do the work around which I'm passionate with people who have been supporting and encouraging me in doing this work. Well, so I'm grateful for that. And then I think about the recent election results and the hope that we can have for ourselves and for our children, and especially for our little girls. And my daughter was, she was around your daughter's age when President Obama won his first election. And I remember what it felt like to be in the sanctuary of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where I lived previously. And everybody was there. Sharpton was there, CNN was there. As Raphael Warnock, who is now one of the leading contenders in the Georgia runoff for for senator. He's the pastor of that congregation. I was a member of that church at the time. And so I'm sitting there. We're basically having like a vigil, with all the things, watching the news come in and just holding our breath. And they started calling out the states that had gone blue. And we were in disbelief, um, elated and also in disbelief. And I just remember looking at my daughter at that time, who was about 7 months old, and feeling like this was going to be a good period in history for her, for us. And so, here we are now, 8 years later, and I have had to explain inexplicable to my children over the past 4 years. Just justifying behaviors that fly in the face of anything that we would teach them morally, through our spiritual conviction, anything that I would teach in a classroom about leadership, about psychology, about wellness and thriving and how to treat people, for them to watch this being, magnified and rewarded for years has been so hard. So, I'm grateful that I can at least say to them that there are statistically more people who see the world and want the same things in the world around true freedom and hope.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, right? So, like, to that end, around, like, we're in this moment as you think about the work that you do. And I've seen you on different panels, right, talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. Talking about really like what this work means in this moment. As you look at this next, like, 6 months or so, do you think that the work is gonna radically shift? Do you think that there is a temptation for folks to kind of rest back on their laurels and say, okay, that period is over, we're now back to quote unquote normal? Like, what do you envision for like the future of diversity, equity, inclusion work to look like as an industry, and then also like in the corporate space?
Well, it's already started to shift, from where we were in the beginning of June to where we are right now in this space. You've got CEOs and senior executives coming out making very bold statements, proactive statements about racial justice and Black Lives Matter, and wanting to pursue and embody anti-racist practices within their organizations, and requiring other, mid-level managers in their organizations to pick up the mantle and carry forth this work. Like, you all need to start talking about race. You need to start developing some plans that, are more equitable and justice. You need to start addressing the unconscious biases that exist within, your parts of the company, because we as a company really need to do this work and focus on it. Well, honestly, there were a lot of middle managers who said, I'm not doing that. And so they didn't, right? So you already had, within the first month, some fairly staunch resistance against, an overt resistance against doing work within the space of racial equity. And that's just part of a long-standing trend in D&I work, that we have been comfortable in our corporate spaces talking about and working on lots of dimensions of difference, that feel like they can benefit from and include the dominant group. But around racial justice, we've been largely silent. So it didn't take long for the silence to continue. It's only exacerbated since then. Companies have started to shift from, oh, we want you to come in and do a program, anti-racist program, to saying, well, we probably need to make it a little broader, because we're getting feedback from our leaders throughout the company that, what about Latinos? What about global? What about, is this just a US thing? Is this just a Black thing? Can everybody in our company? So that was already happening. Also now, hearing in the past couple of weeks, um, people who are just saying, as you stated, let's just get back to normal. Can we? Whoo! I'm glad that was over. That was a terrible time. He was a really bad. That was really bad. That administration was really bad. That guy was just, on some other stuff. So let's just get. It's great that now we can get back to normal. We've got to focus on healing here. And in some ways, that narrative is also subversive to the broader effort because it's allowing for many of the atrocities to go unchecked. And for people to sort of move forward because back to normal was not normal. That's how we got here.
Exactly. To your point around like this D&I and people kind of changing, I wanted to make it broader. Can we talk a little bit? So I'm gonna shake the table early because you and I talked off mic, and so like I respect like like where you rock from, and I'm gonna push you a little bit, and then we'll see how far you go, and then I'll back up, I'll pay attention, I'll follow your lead. But can we talk a little bit about how some of these white chief diversity officers normalize and propagate white supremacy in the corporate context?
So white supremacy is, let's see, there are a couple of different ways. Where should we start? Okay. So one, I think, true work around inclusion, equity, and justice, it centers the experiences, the voices, and the suffering of the people on the margins. I have seen D&I initiatives co-opted in organizations when they center the perspectives, opinions, needs, insecurities, fragility, awkwardness, fears and anxieties about exclusion or disempowerment or disenfranchisement of white men. Right. That becomes like the dominant conversation. That becomes the sparkly object, the thing that everybody is super interested and intrigued and, really wants to focus on and talk about. It's like after the 2016 elections, instead of saying, gosh, we really have to focus our efforts on making sure that we're doing everything we can to help people who are targeted by racism and have been, targeted explicitly by racism through rhetoric and action, even during this campaign season, we got to make sure that they feel safe and supported within our organizations. No, that's not where a lot of the diversity, energy, and initiatives went. It immediately went to the people who are perpetuating the racist behaviors and ideals and saying, we've got to, understand more about the experiences of working class white people who feel that that they've been disenfranchised in some way. And if it becomes an either or, all of a sudden the energy, the enthusiasm, the sparkly objects, the headlines, not to mention the budgets and the resourcing go in that direction. So that's one. And I would, keeping people oppressed economically is the manifestation of white supremacy. It's a way that you keep not just white people, any white people in power, but you're keeping the wealthiest white people in power. So we should pay attention to the concerns of people of all backgrounds who are disenfranchised and who lack the quality resources and infrastructure within their communities that are needed, for them to be able to grow and thrive and flourish. I'm not dismissing that or discounting that. I'm just saying there's some shape shifting involved when the spotlight continues to drift away, or sometimes in a very harsh breakaway from the pain, the suffering, the injustice, the oppression of Black people toward the pain, suffering, injustice, and oppression of other people. It's very hard for the system to hold its gaze and its concern on the experiences and the needs of Black people and be responsive in meeting those. So a lot of D&I officers of all backgrounds struggle to find the courage or to have the depth of understanding about why we should continue to invest in initiatives that focus on and address the unique experiences that people have in organizations because of anti-Blackness.
And you know what? Because see, so I've been waiting to like get you on the show, right? Because I got some tea for you. So
Yeah.
I saw you've been on some
Yeah.
panels, right? So I'm not gonna say
Yeah.
who. I'm not gonna say who yet because my messy boots aren't that messy yet. But one of the people that you've been on a panel with, we had a conversation, and they were hitting me up asking me for advice,
Yeah.
right? So they were like, "Well, how do we do this whole, that D&I thing, but not make white people too uncomfortable?"
Right.
And I told them, I say, look, the reality is we're not going to make progress in this space without making those in the majority uncomfortable. I would even argue that if the people are comfortable, you probably aren't making any real progress. They didn't like that feedback that much, but it was the truth though. It's like, look, like why this constant demand to center. Right. And I guess the other thing is like just intellectually, it's like, have we not been doing that for the past 400 plus years? We've been so you're looking at quote unquote strategic ways to do what we've been doing.
Right.
Like, that's not actually innovation. You're trying to put a new hat on the same suit, but it's the same thing.
That's right. It's like a Scooby-Doo episode. Absolutely. You're chasing a false ghost. I mean, there's no boogeyman. This is the exact same thing, but there's like this fear of the metaphorical boogeyman that's going to jump out if we, pursue this sponsorship program or this leadership development program, or this HBCU hiring initiative that's actually going to result in the greater empowerment and advancement of Black people within this organization. They're like, oh, some people are not going to like that. I said, of course they're not going to like it. That's why we're doing this work. That's the point. Like, that's not the ending point. That's the starting point. If they liked it, we wouldn't have to do a focused initiative in this domain. So let's stop talking about that kind of resistance as a surprise, as like the gotcha in a cheesy Scooby-Doo episode. It's not, that's what has frustrated me over the summer as well. And then as we got to the fall, honestly, full candor here, once that executive order came out, I mean, and you can see that I tweeted about it one day when that administration put the executive order out that said you're not allowed to say thus and so in any trainings because, in essence, we don't like the story that tells about America, A, and B, it makes us feel bad about ourselves. So we don't want you to come in and say or do anything that's going to make us feel badly about ourselves. I said, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for finally putting it on paper.
Federalizing
to explain this dynamic in intellectual terms and hypothetical terms and metaphorical terms. I mean, I write poetry about this stuff, trying to get people to give different ways of people to wrap their minds around some of this when the data is not palatable to them. So yeah, I'm trying to find any way to like get the message across. There's some resistance, and here's why. When you've got folks who are saying, oh, no, that's not the case. We just want to make sure we're being inclusive, right? Because that's our goal, isn't it? To be inclusive. So you co-opt the very nature of inclusion by, disregarding anti-Blackness and the inequities and injustices that come along with it. That executive order just laid it out there, plain and simple. Well, I said, okay, from henceforth, now all I will have to do is cite as indicated in the executive order. This is the mentality about this work. So, how do you want to go forward from there?
Well, it's something to be said about just how insidious. I mean, I think the other point is that, there is a push to get back to the time when anti-blackness and oppression was not only socially acceptable and something that one would aspire to maintain, but was also federally legislated, right? And so, like, this idea
Well, yeah,
of
we're
that,
gonna pack the courts to make
right,
sure that we can, return to the time when these forms of apartheid, anti-black apartheid in the United States are federally legislated through the judicial, and enforced through the judicial branch.
I was on a panel some months ago, and we were talking about like this idea, like we were talking about, this was while the executive order was in place. And so, there was questions like, we're not going to even allow certain people to ask certain questions. There's certain things we won't even raise. And it's
Yeah.
scary. It's scary when you think about like, wow, like that's all it
In
really
4
takes.
weeks, they had pulled back the learning pathways and curriculums.
Everything
have been put on hold. There were sidebars and comment things in the comment column. All of a sudden, can we say this? Do we need to include this in the session? Can we get this point across without using this phrase? It didn't take 4 weeks for that full blown. They're still tiptoeing.
They are. Oh no, they're still tiptoeing. But shout out to the people who are like, no, like I'm not gonna do that.
Right.
Like I think about Michelle J. Kim with Awaken.
Yes.
I think about Brittany J. Harris and of course Mary Frances Winters, the Winters Group. I think about
Lily Zhang.
Lily Zhang. Shout out to Lily Zhang. I think there are folks out there who are like, no, like, because here's the thing, like there's something about, and so this is where I would like for us to have a part 2 and maybe even do a panel on like the psychology of hierarchy and like how we do seem to kind of like just bend the knee to whoever has the power, irrespective of like the character of those people who wield that power. Because it's like why? And I was talking about, it's like all we have to do is just not obey. We don't have to obey this. Why is it that we're all like, no, we have to do this? Like, what is gonna, if enough of us say no, we're not going to do X, then X won't happen. But I'm curious about that. Like, I'm curious about like, what will it take for folks to just not go with the flow on any damn thing? Because like that executive order was wild to me. Like even when I hope that we don't forget it. I hope we don't act like that was just like a crazy thing.
I will be talking about that from henceforth. Yeah, I mean the assumptions that were behind it were flawed. Just the lack of understanding, the absurdity of including a critical race theory and unconscious bias training in the same category, where from being in.
Yo, that was crazy. Yes,
you are talking about 2 entirely different concepts and different concepts, and often the twain don't meet. I won't say never the twain shall meet, but often the twain don't.
Yeah, but they don't meet though.
So just to bucket it all together and say all you folks who are doing this stuff and not try to have any kind of intellectual sophistication about it was offensive to me as someone who does that work. Not to mention, just the human rights violations that come along with censorship. So the point is one. Well, let me say one of the things I did during that time was to just flood my LinkedIn with 21 days of free DEI.
I saw that.
I'm like, okay, you all don't want to pay for it now. Guess what? There are so many of us who have been working our hearts off, working our behinds off for years and years, not just in 2020, but there's so much information that's freely available. There is no excuse for ignorance. So that's my first comment on this is, how do we say, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not colluding with this. You don't have to wait for some government agency to pay for your training, for you to be conscious of these kinds of issues and the role that race and other dimensions of difference play in our society. Educate yourselves. There's so much out there that is freely available that no one should ever be able to censor your awareness and your conviction about, what's truth. We've got to fight the propaganda. It is so intense right now. I'm fortunate in the sense that when I have my family Zoom meeting on Thanksgiving, because we will be meeting by Zoom, and if you're not meeting with your family by Zoom, please don't post pictures on Facebook, because I simply cannot take it.
That's real though.
I can't with this.
The stakes are too high. We gotta chill. We gotta stay home. The
stakes are too high. I mean, I've watched you all at your birthday parties, your baby showers, your weddings, all of these things. Like, just please, it's enough. So when I am having my Thanksgiving Zoom, I'm having it with members of my family who are values aligned. Okay. That is not the case for many other families in our country right now. They're going to sit down, hopefully at their family Zoom, and have some difficult conversations, or avoid having some difficult conversations, because they are on such different pages about what our country should be, about what inclusion really looks like, about what leadership really is. And they bought into a lot of the propaganda that they've been presented with in a very calculated and explicit way. This is not a new tactic. Trying to keep people ignorant is not a new tactic. This is what they did to our people when we were enslaved. This is what they did to the indigenous people. As their lands were being stolen, they were also being sent away to these quote unquote schools that strip them of their identities and of their cultures, and the important relationships they had with family and community. We were not allowed to read. So ignorance is always a weapon, but knowledge is what we can do to combat the ignorance. And we can't collude with ignorance. You just can't. That's what we were being asked to do, is to collude with ignorance. And you can't do that. And we can't go back to that place, because we think that it's more peaceful and it's more calm and it's better if we just don't talk about these things at all. That's not the path forward for us.
I think to that end, right? Like, and I've shared this before on Living Corporate, like as a platform, like we have folks who listen in who are really trying to understand, how to lead better, what they should be thinking. These are, I'm talking about like folks, mostly white folks, right? Trying to figure out how to show up better, how to lead better. I think like in this era, as we get out of the Trump presidency and into a Biden-Harris presidency, and we get into 2021 and beyond, like let's talk about the next, let's just say, year. What are things that leaders can be doing to continue to show up better in light of all the things that we've learned and are learning about ourselves? And I say us, I'm really kind of talking about white majority, not really black folks. Black folks been knowing a lot of the things that folks are just kind of coming into understanding of. What are some things that you believe that leaders can continue to practice and focus on?
So one thing that leaders can practice and focus on is, is avoiding false equivalencies. Okay. Really respecting the differences in our differences. So you can't just jump from one program or set of initiatives or conversations or a moment of awakening around the Black experience, right over to LGBTQ. Because there are some things that are similar about the nature of stigmatization, bias, oppression, and the harm that it does, but there are also some particularities. So leaders really need to start to examine the context, the historical context, the intersections of different identities and the power dynamics within their own organizations, rather than embracing one size fits all, let's welcome everybody to the table sort of inclusion initiatives. So that's one thing. Another is to, people want to say forgive and forget. I think we should be cognizant of our history in the spirit of Sankofa. You move forward by looking behind, by learning from the past, by acknowledging and respecting what has happened and not finding ways to dismiss it because it reveals some uncomfortable truths about you, about your family, your community, your neighbors. You got to hold all of that. You got to look at the fact that 73 million people recorded votes for 4 more years of the same or even more intense suppression and human rights violations and abuses. In the name of what? Truly in the name of white supremacy. There's very little that can explain why millions and millions of people would willingly submit themselves over to an authoritarian system in the midst of a global pandemic that is, minimizing the loss of American life on a daily basis. There's no other way to explain that without calling out and acknowledging the white supremacy that was baked into the rhetoric and the support for the current administration, the outgoing administration. So we need to act with a recognition that if, let's say, 50% of the voting of the population voted, because we know 100% didn't vote, not even that. Even if 50% voted, then that would be a good 25%, 1 out of 4 people who were willingly signing up for more of that. So if you're a leader and that is not your version of leadership, you're going to have to be extremely, explicit and vigilant about what you do value and what you are hoping to promote. And I think we also see here, as we saw in 2016, and this is in the spirit of living corporate, Black women are going to do the work. Black women have been doing the work to salvage democracy, to build character, to try to find ways, even under the most horrific of circumstances, to push their fellow brothers and sisters along the path of doing the right thing that truly allows us to live free and to be free. In Michelle Obama's terms, not in certain moments to not go there, right? So they go low, we go high. Yep. You've had a lot of examples of that from Black women in positions of leadership constantly, going high when other people are going low, but not hiding out, being very smart and calculating and strategic about how to mobilize power and resources for the common good. So you can't talk about this election, even if you're thrilled about it and you feel that you're on the side of the nearly 78 million who supported Biden-Harris at the top of the ticket. You can't celebrate any of that without celebrating Kamala Harris, first of all, obviously on the ticket of woman of color. We also have to talk about Stacey Abrams.
Absolutely.
And her leadership. We
Absolutely.
have to talk about Keisha Lance Bottoms. We have to talk about Lori Lightfoot in the city of Chicago in this pandemic. We have to talk about Muriel Bowser repainting Pennsylvania Avenue as Black Lives Matter Plaza. Like, we have to talk about all of the ways that Black women have been leading in these critical moments when our very democracy is at stake. Corporate leaders need to know that. And in this next season going forward in a Biden-Harris presidency, it's time that we drop the tired mantra that we can't find any. Well, how do we know they can handle the job? Are they qualified enough? One thing that should not be questioned at this point is whether or not Black women can lead.
These are facts. No, I mean, I'm just trying to give you space to rock. No, you're absolutely right.
Preposterous. It's absolutely preposterous that one would have to continue to argue for that. When you just see the level of confidence and capability. I mean, I'm clearly a Barack Obama supporter and a voter and advocate, but the brilliance of Michelle Obama was never lost on me. That from day one, I looked at Barack Obama and then I said, okay, but let me see his partner, because that's going to tell me the difference between Barack Obama and Clarence Thomas.
Listen,
let's talk about the partners.
No, you're 100% right. I think the other thing is that what you're speaking to about, like, we can't find them, or if they handle the job. A lot of that just goes back to the reality of racial gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right. It's like we can look at the meta narrative of Black performance in this nation, and we can say that Black people are actually overperformers.
Oh my gosh.
We overperform. We've historically overperformed.
Yeah.
While being literally criminally under-resourced and abused.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. No food, no sleep, no food, and picking bales of cotton and building monuments and railroad tracks and clearing out forests. For whom? I mean, this is not just like, let's go to Williamsburg and have a little tea on the back porch kind of situation. This is the kind of thing. I mean, engineering of agriculture, crop rotation and so forth. You're overperforming, not just in the physical aspects, but in the ingenuity that was required to be able to build the infrastructure of this nation.
100%. And I think, so to your point around like acknowledging that and being explicit by like leaders acknowledging that and being explicit is 100% right. But that takes a certain level of emotional and intellectual honesty that, frankly, I don't know if a lot of leaders have still in this era. But I asked you the question and I appreciate it. And you're right. As you think about,
you didn't ask me what was likely to happen. You asked me what should happen. I'm saying, in all fairness, if you want to walk around with your chest out because, we did it. We did it. If you want to go out with your girlfriends and do the happy dance, or, you want to write your supportive letter from the CEO that shows you in a light that says, hey, I was on the right side of history. While you do all of those things, which I encourage everybody to do, because this was a battle. It was a battle for freedom. It was a battle for democracy for everybody, not just for Black people, but for everybody. So yeah, go out and acknowledge what happened, because it was a hard fought battle. But when you do it, make sure that you give the war heroes their credit, instead of treating them like they are the criminals. That's the irony of it. Breonna Taylor's, in the same week that all of this is happening, the police officer who was responsible for the shooting sued Breonna Taylor's significant other. You cannot be the victim here. You're not
at all. No, I think to your point is like, what I'm hoping is, and I recognize that this is an intellectual exercise for many, right? This is not going to be automatic, but I'm hoping that folks will realize, like, look, at each of your organizations, there is a Stacey Abrams. There are women out there who are carrying the majority of the labor, not just for their own personal benefit, but for the benefit of your entire organization. Similar to how Stacey Abrams, she carried all this for the benefit of the entire nation. But I get that type of connecting the dots may take some support. But my hope is that white folks just listen to us. You know what I mean? Like, long story long is like, just listen to us. Like, we've been telling y'all this from the jump. It's like, just listen to us. And so I know I asked you a question. Now it's turning into a rant on the back end, but it's the truth. Now,
it's the truth. There's a lot of brilliance that is unrecognized, untapped, unutilized. Some of the criticisms that people made about Stacey Abrams had nothing to do with her political savvy, but about Eurocentric standards of beauty, which is also nonsense.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about all these dimensions of anti-Blackness, we're talking about colorism, we're talking about body type, we're talking about how people, different images of white female beauty, hair. So I love that we're talking about Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris. If you follow
Absolutely.
me on that.
I do follow you on that, because now there's something to be said about that, about like the reality is that we've always historically, we've shamed Black women for their bodies and yet sought to actually colonize them at the same time and, lift the very things that we shame Black female bodies for. We then praise white women for having those body types that they go and like, oftentimes we'll go to the doctor to modify and manufacture those aesthetics. And so
exactly. So, let's celebrate. We can celebrate Beyonce. We can celebrate Kamala Harris. We can celebrate Serena Williams. We can celebrate Stacey Abrams. They are all brilliant leaders, all in their own right, and all identify as Black women, and we're blessed for it.
This has been a dope conversation. Dr. Roberts, first of all, I feel like we got to have you back for another conversation.
so much for us to break down, huh?
There's a lot for us to break down, and like I really want to make sure that people know where to find you. If there's anything that you're working on, but like I want to give you space to like plug whatever you got going.
Let's see. So I'm a mile a minute these days, Zach. There's so much. So probably the best way to keep up with me and what I'm doing, LinkedIn is a very active community for me. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. Also have a website. Go to lauramorganroberts.com and find my contact information and reach out from there. And then I have a book, The Alignment Quest Toolkit, that I self-published, so that's available on Amazon. I have a book, Race, Work, and Leadership, published by Harvard Business Review Press, quite relevant to the conversations we've been having today, learning about and from the Black experience.
This has been dope. Dr. Roberts, we're going to have you back. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
I'd love to. All right, thanks.
Peace. All right, listen, really appreciate y'all being here. Make sure y'all check out the notes in the show notes. Make sure if you have a question that you want to send to us, you have a listener letter, anything like that, just email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, this has been Zach. Oh yeah, make sure you give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. All right, catch y'all soon. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.